I flew 10 hours across the Atlantic Ocean to attend my younger sister's wedding, carrying a custom crystal gift set and a heart full of hope. But when I reached the grand stone archway of the Rhode Island Castle venue, my own parents stepped out of the shadows and physically blocked the entrance. "Only family is allowed." My mother sneered her eyes, scanning me with pure disgust. "You are not invited, so leave before you humiliate us." Heartbroken, but keeping my dignity intact, I turned around and walked away. 5 days later, my phone rang. It was my mother in absolute hysteric, screaming that the $67,000 venue bill had bounced and begging me to fix it. I just laughed into the receiver and delivered a truth that made her gasp for air. My name is Claire, and I am 33 years old. If you are watching this, let me know in the comments where you are from. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever had to use cold, hard facts to destroy toxic family members who tried to use you. Because today, I am going to tell you exactly how I let my family's own greed burn their entire lives to the ground. The ocean breeze was crisp as my rental car pulled up to the Newport Coastal Castle. It was an exclusive, breathtaking oceanfront estate in Rhode Island that cost more to rent for one night than most people make in a year. The castle was an imposing structure of gray stone and towering turrets surrounded by emerald green lawns that sloped down to the Atlantic Ocean. Valet attendants dressed in crisp white tuxedos hurried around luxury vehicles. String music floated through the salty air, mixing with the sound of crashing waves. I stepped out of the car, smoothing down my tailored navy silk dress. In my hands, I carried a carefully wrapped box containing imported crystal champagne flutes, a wedding gift for my sister Madison, and her fiancé, Andre. Madison is 29 years old and makes a living as a lifestyle influencer. She curates a perfectly filtered life on social media, filled with designer unboxings and relentless humble bragging. Andre is a 31-year-old African-American tech entrepreneur who had my parents completely mesmerized from the day they met him. He wore custom-tailored suits, constantly name-dropped venture capital firms, and claimed his financial technology startup was on the verge of a massive initial public offering. My parents, Catherine and William, treated him like absolute royalty. They hosted lavish dinners for him and hung on to his every word. They finally had the billionaire son-in-law they believed they deserved to elevate their social standing. And me. I am a financial technology auditor working for a major corporate firm in London, because I chose a demanding career over pretending to be a socialite. My parents always treated me like an embarrassing secret. I was too blunt, too serious, and too focused on data and logic for their superficial world. But I still showed up. I took time off work and flew across the ocean because family is supposed to be family. I walked up the grand stone steps of the castle, ready to celebrate. I had not even reached the heavy oak double doors when two figures stepped out from the shadows of the stone archway. Catherine and William. They were not smiling. "What are you doing here?" Catherine hissed, her voice low and venomous. She was wearing an extravagant silver mother of the bride gown that looked incredibly expensive. I stopped on the steps, genuinely confused. "I am here for the wedding." "Mom, my flight was slightly delayed, but I made it before the ceremony begins." William stepped forward, physically, blocking the entryway. He glanced nervously around the manicured gardens to ensure none of the wealthy guests milling about could hear us. "You are not supposed to be here, Claire," he said. "What do you mean?" I asked, my grip tightening on the gift bag. "I am Madison's sister. This is an exclusive event," Catherine said, her eyes scanning me up and down with utter disdain. "Andre's family is here. His investors are here. Elite high society people. We cannot have you marching in here looking so severe and plain. You do not fit the aesthetic Madison has curated for this special day. You will just make her look bad." I stood there while the ocean winds suddenly felt freezing against my skin. They were not joking. They were entirely serious. My own parents were barring me from my sister's wedding because I did not fit the social media aesthetic of her fraudulent lifestyle. I took time off work and I flew across the Atlantic, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous, icy calm. And you are telling me to go back to London. We are telling you that this day is for family, William said brutally. And right now you do not belong with this family. Leave now before I have the venue security escort you off the premises. The utter disrespect was staggering. But I am not the kind of woman who cries, screams, or begs for love from people who are incapable of giving it. I did not shed a single tear. I just looked at the two people who had raised me. I saw right through their designer clothes and their country club posture, seeing them for the pathetic status-obsessed shells they truly were. I see, I said simply. So, I am not family enough to watch her get married. But I was family enough to put down the $10,000 deposit on this exact doorway we are standing in when your credit cards were inexplicably declining 6 months ago. Catherine's face flushed a deep, angry red. We paid you back, she snapped. Do not you dare bring up money right now. You are so classless. Claire. Always obsessed with numbers and ledgers. Someone has to be, I replied coldly. Enjoy the wedding. I walked over to the nearest stone trash receptacle and dropped the crystal champagne floats right inside. The sound of the expensive glass shattering echoed loudly under the archway. Catherine gasped, clutching her chest in shock. Without another word, I turned on my heel, pulled out my phone, and ordered a premium rideshare to take me straight back to the airport. I climbed into the back of the sleek black vehicle, my heart pounding with a mixture of adrenaline and absolute disgust. I told the driver to take me back to Boston Logan International Airport. As I stared out the tinted window at the ocean shrinking in the distance, I felt a strange sense of liberation. The final thread tying me to their toxic ecosystem had just been severed. But the universe was not done yet. We were about 20 minutes away from the venue, cruising down the highway when my phone buzzed in my hand. It was a push notification from my banking application. I glanced down, expecting it to be the charge for the ride. Instead, my blood ran ice cold. An alert flashed across my screen showing that a charge of $67,450 had been successfully processed on my platinum card by the Newport Coastal Castle. I stared at the screen, my mind racing. $67,000. It was the exact remaining balance for the entire wedding. My parents had not just kicked me out of the wedding to protect their image. They had kept my credit card information on file from the deposit 6 months ago. And when the time came to pay the final staggering bill for Andre and Madison's extravagant wedding, they did not use Andre's money. They did not use their own money. They stole mine. I did not scream. I did not throw my phone against the leather seat of the vehicle. Instead, a chilling, absolute calm washed over me. This is the fundamental difference between Catherine and me. She operates on emotion vanity and panic. I operate on data logic and strict compliance. When you work as a senior financial technology auditor investigating corporate fraud, you learn very quickly that money always leaves a trail. And my family had just left a digital footprint the size of a crater. Driver, I said, my voice perfectly steady. Keep heading to Logan Airport. But could you turn your Wi-Fi hotspot on? Please. Sure thing. May, he replied. I pulled my laptop out of my carry-on bag and rested it on my knees. I connected to the internet and immediately logged directly into my secure banking portal. The $67,450 transaction was sitting right there in the pending column. When a merchant charges a card that is kept on file, they are required by strict payment processing laws to have a signed digital authorization form for the final amount, especially for a sum exceeding $50,000. The venue would not have just run the card blindly for that massive amount without sending a digital invoice to whoever was acting as the point of contact. I opened my email. Nothing. I checked my spam folder. Nothing. That meant Catherine, William. Or Andre had provided the venue coordinator with a different email address, but deliberately kept my billing details attached to the file. They had intercepted the final invoice, forged my digital authorization, and pushed the payment through. They clearly assumed I would not notice the transaction until my monthly statement arrived long after the wedding was over. The cake was eaten, and the honeymoon was underway. They thought I would be too concerned with family loyalty to actually dispute a wedding bill. They thought I would just eat the cost to avoid putting my sister in legal jeopardy. They thought wrong. I arrived at Boston Logan International Airport and immediately checked myself into the first-class international lounge. I found a quiet, soundproof pod in the corner, sat down and pulled out my phone. I bypassed the standard customer service number on the back of my Platinum card and dialed the direct line to the High-Tier Fraud Investigations Department Fraud Division. This is Agent Davis. How can I assist you today? Hello, Agent Davis. My name is Claire. I need to report a fraudulent, unauthorized charge of $67,450 on my account processed approximately 40 minutes ago by a merchant listed as Newport Coastal Castle. I see the pending charge here. Ma'am, the agent said, his tone shifting into professional urgency. Can you confirm you did not authorize this transaction verbally or in writing? I absolutely did not. I stated clearly. My card information was kept on file from a previous $10,000 deposit made 6 months ago. The individuals hosting the event have unlawfully authorized the remaining balance using my card without my consent. I am requesting an immediate chargeback and a freeze on that specific vendor. Understood, the agent replied, typing rapidly. Because the charge is currently pending, we will initiate a fraud dispute right now. The funds will be placed in a provisional hold. The merchant will receive a temporary approval code today, but the funds will fail to clear settlement. It will officially bounce back as a fraudulent reversal in 3 to 5 business days. I smiled. 3 to 5 business days. That meant the venue owner, currently looking at his computer screen in Rhode Island, saw a green checkmark. He thought he had been paid. The wedding was going to proceed perfectly. Madison would get her glamorous photos. Andre would get to play the wealthy tech mogul. Catherine and William would get to pop champagne and accept congratulations from their snobby high society friends. But by next Thursday, the money would violently vanish from the venue bank account. Thank you, Agent Davis, I said. Please ensure the fraud protocol is fully documented. I will be pursuing this to the maximum extent of the law. I hung up the phone, closed my laptop, and walked over to the lounge bar. A glass of your best champagne, please, I told the bartender, as I sipped the crisp, cold wine. My mind shifted from the credit card to the bigger picture. Why did they steal from me? Andre was supposedly a multi-millionaire. His startup was allegedly preparing for a massive initial public offering. Catherine and William had spent the last 2 years bragging to anyone who would listen about how their future son-in-law was going to buy them a vacation home in the Hamptons. If Andre was so incredibly wealthy, why did they need to commit felony credit card fraud to pay the caterer? Something was fundamentally structurally wrong. The math did not add up. And if there is one thing I cannot stand, it is bad math. My flight back to London was boarding in 2 hours. I had plenty of time to start pulling on the loose threads of Andre's glamorous life. I opened a secure browser window and typed in the name of Andre's startup company. The website was slick. It featured buzzwords like decentralized asset management and next-generation capital. It looked impressive to a layman, but to a senior auditor, it looked like a hollow shell. I navigated to the corporate registry databases. I pulled the public filings for his company. I cross-referenced the corporate address listed on his website. It was not a skyscraper in Manhattan or a tech hub in Silicon Valley. The address was a registered virtual mailbox at a shipping store in Delaware. I kept digging. I searched for the names of his board of directors listed on the site. 2 of the men did not exist outside of newly created professional profiles using stock photos. The 3rd man was listed as the chief financial officer. I ran his name through federal court records. Bingo. The supposed financial officer had a prior conviction for wire fraud in the state of Florida. My pulse quickened. I was not just dealing with a cheap, lying brother-in-law. I was dealing with a professional grifter. Andre had not built a tech company. He had built a mirage. But how was he funding it? How was he paying for the tailored suits, the expensive watches, the first-class flights to Bora Bora that Madison constantly flaunted on her social media? Con artists need a revenue stream. They need capital to burn to maintain the illusion of wealth. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the airport runway through the massive glass windows of the lounge. Where did the money come from? My stomach dropped as a terrifying, highly logical hypothesis formed in my mind. Catherine and William. My parents were not ultra-wealthy, but they were comfortable. They owned their house in Connecticut outright. They had solid retirement accounts. They were the perfect marks for a charismatic, sharp-dressed scammer promising triple returns on investments. I quickly logged into the Public Property Records database for the state of Connecticut. I searched for my parents' address. A property deed history popped up on my screen. Everything was standard until I scrolled down to an entry filed exactly 8 months ago, just 1 month after Andre and Madison got engaged. There it was, etched in permanent digital ink. A home equity line of credit origination amount $300,000. Borrowers William and Catherine. They had leveraged their fully paid-off retirement home to pull out $300,000 in cash. I closed my eyes, letting the sheer magnitude of their stupidity wash over me. They did not take out that loan to renovate their kitchen. They took it out to hand it to Andre. They bought into his fake company. They funded their own daughter's engagement ring, Andre's luxury vehicle, and the illusion of his success using the equity of their own home. And when the wedding day arrived, the $300,000 was already gone, blown on maintaining the fake lifestyle. Andre had no money to pay the venue. My parents had no cash left to cover it. So, in a desperate, frantic bid to prevent the wedding from being canceled on the spot, to prevent the absolute social humiliation of being exposed as broke in front of their country club friends, they resorted to stealing my credit card. They literally committed federal fraud to keep the music playing for one more night. Flight to London Heathrow is now boarding, the overhead speaker announced. I closed my laptop and slid it into my bag. I was not angry anymore. I was armed. I had the bank fraud dispute in motion. I had the corporate registry files. I had the property deeds. I had all the pieces of the puzzle. They told me I was not family. They threw me out like trash. Fine. I would not act like family. I would act like an auditor. And an auditor's job is to ruthlessly expose the truth, no matter who goes to prison in the process. I boarded my flight, ordered a black coffee, and began drafting my report for the Federal Financial Crimes Division. The wedding party was just getting started in Rhode Island, but the countdown to their total destruction had officially begun. The flight across the Atlantic felt incredibly short, while the other passengers in the business class cabin slept or watched movies. I remained glued to my screen. I compiled the digital evidence harvested from corporate registries and drafted a whistleblower report detailing the fraudulent nature of Andre's startup. I outlined the fake board of directors, the hidden criminal record of his chief financial officer, and the highly suspicious flow of capital involving my parents' home equity line of credit. I attached the IP logs showing the unauthorized transaction. By the time the plane descended into London, I had an ironclad dossier ready for federal authorities. I did not hit send. I wanted the bank chargeback to hit the venue first. The chaos needed to start precisely on my schedule. When I landed, I turned off airplane mode. My phone immediately erupted with buzzing. There were dozens of text messages, missed calls, and social media tags. I opened Instagram. Madison had wasted no time weaponizing the situation for her influencer narrative. Her latest post featured a professionally edited photograph of her and Andre kissing under the venue archway. The caption was pure psychological manipulation. It read, Sending prayers to my older sister today. We had to make the heartbreaking decision to have security escort her away from our wedding venue. Her jealousy and mental instability became a safety risk for our guests. It is devastating when family tries to destroy your happiness. But Andre and I refuse to let toxic energy dim our light. Thank you to our real family for surrounding us with so much love and protection today. The comments were predictable. Followers and extended family members praised her bravery. My phone was flooded with angry text messages from aunts and cousins. They called me a jealous monster and a profound disappointment. They accused me of sabotaging my sister because I lacked a partner. In their twisted reality, my parents were saints for protecting the bride from my tantrum. I did not reply. I simply took screenshots of Madison's post and the hateful texts, saving them into a designated folder. They were defaming me while spending money stolen from my credit card to fund the event they kicked me out of. The sheer audacity was impressive. I flagged a taxi outside the terminal and gave the driver my address. I watched the familiar grey streets of London roll by, feeling completely detached from the manufactured drama exploding on my phone. When I finally stepped into my high-rise apartment overlooking the Thames River, I dropped my luggage by the door and walked straight to my home office. I bypassed the shower and the coffee maker. I turned on my 3 large monitors and woke up my auditing workstation. It was time to map out the exact architecture of Andre's fraudulent empire. I pulled the corporate tax filings for his company and started tracing the origin of his supposed venture capital funding. The money was not coming from legitimate investment firms. The incoming wire transfers were originating from a series of decentralized cryptocurrency wallets and obscure regional banks. I ran the routing numbers and discovered that these accounts were linked to predatory high-interest personal loans and home equity lines of credit, just like the one my parents had taken out. Andre was not a tech visionary. He was running an affinity fraud scheme targeting older upper-middle-class suburbanites who desperately wanted to be part of the next big technology boom. He used his charm, his expensive suits, and his sophisticated vocabulary to convince people like my parents to hand over their retirement savings. He then used the fresh capital from new victims to pay small initial returns to older victims, creating the illusion of a profitable business. But the vast majority of the cash was being siphoned directly into his personal offshore accounts to fund his lavish lifestyle. He was driving a luxury sports car and wearing $50,000 watches entirely funded by the stolen equity of his victims' homes. My parents had handed him $300,000 of their own financial security. They had mortgaged their future to buy a front-row seat to a mirage. And because that money had evaporated into Andre's pockets, they had been forced to commit wire fraud using my credit card just to avoid the social humiliation of a canceled wedding. I spent the next 3 days living in a state of absolute focus. I went to my corporate job during the day, conducting legitimate audits for my firm. At night, I returned to my apartment and monitored the digital trap I had set. I watched Madison's social media accounts closely. She posted daily updates from her honeymoon in Bora Bora. There were pictures of her and Andre drinking champagne on private yachts, lounging in overwater bungalows, and eating caviar on pristine white sand beaches. Every post was tagged with captions about living a blessed and abundant life. They were burning through thousands of dollars a day, money that rightfully belonged to the victims of Andre's Ponzi scheme, money that had been drained from my parents' retirement home. I watched them flaunt their stolen wealth with a cold, calculating patience. I knew exactly what was happening behind the scenes in the banking system. The provisional credit my card issuer had granted the wedding venue was moving through the automated clearinghouse network. It was approaching the final stage of settlement where the fraud alert would trigger the automatic reversal. I did not warn my parents. I did not text my sister. I simply went about my routine maintaining complete radio silence. I let them enjoy the sunshine, the luxury, and the delusion of their superiority. I let them believe they had successfully disposed of me and gotten away with a massive financial crime. I let them climb as high as possible, so the fall would be absolutely catastrophic. Their impending destruction was going to be an absolute masterpiece indeed. On the morning of the 5th day, the financial guillotine finally dropped. I was sitting at my glass desk in my London office reviewing a routine compliance report for a corporate client when a specialized alert popped up on my secure banking portal. The status of the $67,450 charge had officially changed from pending to reversed. The provisional hold was removed. The funds had been aggressively clawed back from the merchant account belonging to the Newport Coastal Castle. The chargeback was absolute and permanent. The banking network had flagged the transaction with a hard fraud code, thousands of miles away in Rhode Island. A venue owner was opening his accounting software and seeing a massive red deficit where his payment should have been. I took a slow sip of my black coffee, relishing the quiet hum of the London traffic outside my window. The digital bomb had detonated. Now it was only a matter of time before the shockwave reached my parents. It took exactly 4 hours. My personal phone began vibrating relentlessly on my desk. The caller identification displayed my mother's name. I let it ring. I watched the screen light up repeatedly as she called 5 consecutive times. I wanted her panic to marinate. I wanted her to feel the rising tide of absolute terror before I allowed her the privilege of speaking to me. On the 6th attempt, I finally picked up the phone and pressed it to my ear. I did not say hello. I just waited. Claire. Catherine screamed into the receiver. Her voice was shrill, ragged, and completely stripped of its usual country club arrogance. Thank God you answered. You need to call your credit card company right this second. There has been a massive bank error. The wedding venue coordinator just called your father and threatened to call the police. They are saying the payment for the reception bounced. They are accusing us of theft. You need to call American Express and fix this glitch immediately before they ruin Madison's honeymoon. I leaned back in my ergonomic desk chair and swiveled to face the sprawling skyline of the city. My pulse was incredibly slow and steady. There is no bank error. Mom, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerously calm register. The payment bounced because I personally ordered the bank to reverse it. I reported the transaction as felony fraud. The line went dead silent for 2 full seconds. When Catherine finally spoke, her voice trembled with a mixture of disbelief and rising fury. You did what? Are you out of your mind? We used your card on file because Andre had a temporary issue with his offshore transfer. We were going to pay you back next week. You are going to call the bank right now and tell them it was a misunderstanding. Do you have any idea how humiliating this is for us? The venue owner is threatening to sue us for breach of contract. You stole my financial information to fund a party you physically barred me from attending, I replied coldly. You forged my digital signature on an invoice exceeding $60,000. That is not a misunderstanding. That is wire fraud. And my credit card is not a charity fund for people who treat me like disposable garbage. I heard rustling on the other end of the line, followed by William's booming voice. He had clearly grabbed the phone from Catherine. Listen to me very carefully, you vindictive little brat, William barked. You are going to fix this immediately, or I will personally sue you for defamation. We are your parents. You do not get to throw a temper tantrum and report us to the federal authorities just because you felt left out of a wedding. You are embarrassing this family. Andre is a highly respected entrepreneur, and you are jeopardizing his reputation with your petty jealousy. I let out a sharp, humorless laugh that echoed in my quiet office. You really have no idea what is happening. Do you? William. You think this is about me being jealous of a wedding invitation? What are you talking about? He demanded. I opened the forensic audit file on my computer. Let me explain exactly how deep the hole you dug for yourselves actually is, I said, keeping my tone surgical and precise. The bank security team traced the internet protocol address used to forge my signature on the venue authorization form. It did not come from your computer. It came from an IP address registered to a luxury loft apartment in downtown Boston. It came from Andre's laptop. Your brilliant billionaire son-in-law committed federal wire fraud using my identity. I have already handed the tracking logs over to the authorities. That is a lie. Catherine shrieked in the background. Andre is a multimillionaire. He just had a cash flow delay. Andre is a professional con artist, I stated cleanly, slicing through her delusion. I spent the last 4 days running a forensic audit on his supposed financial technology startup. His company is a shell. His board of directors is comprised of fake profiles using stock photos. His chief financial officer is a convicted felon who served time in Florida for running a similar scam. Andre operates a textbook Ponzi scheme. He has zero actual revenue. He funds his designer suits and Madison's lavish lifestyle by defrauding gullible investors who want to feel rich. Investors exactly like you two. Like you. The silence on the line was absolute. The kind of silence that happens when the oxygen is sucked out of a room. I pulled up the property deed records on my screen. I know about the home equity line of credit. I continued driving the final nail into the coffin. I know you mortgaged your fully paid-off retirement house for $300,000 8 months ago. You gave that cash to Andre thinking you were getting in on the ground floor of an initial public offering. But that money is gone. He used your house equity to buy his Porsche and to pay for those first-class tickets to Bora Bora. He had no money left to pay the venue. You had no money left to cover it. So you stole from me to keep your fake socialite status intact for one more night. No, Catherine gasped. Her voice was barely a whisper now, stripped of all defiance. It sounded like she was suffocating. William, tell her she is lying. William, say something. William did not say a word. I could hear the sound of his heavy, ragged breathing. He knew I was right. The sudden realization that he had handed his entire life savings to a charismatic scammer was crashing down on him. I forwarded my complete investigative dossier to the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Financial Crimes Division of the FBI yesterday morning. I added ruthlessly, they already opened an active case file. The venue owner suing you for the unpaid $67,000 is going to be the least of your problems. The federal government is about to freeze every asset attached to Andre and anyone who facilitated his fraud. Claire, please. Catherine began to sob violently. You cannot do this to us. We will lose the house. We will lose everything. Madison is on her honeymoon. Please, you have to retract the reports. We are your family. Only family is allowed, I replied, echoing the exact words she had spat at me outside the castle doors just 5 days prior. I am not family. I am just the auditor. Good luck with the federal investigators. I ended the call and blocked their numbers on my personal and business phones. I closed the audit file on my computer and locked my screen. The trap had been flawlessly executed. There was no going back for any of them. The illusion they had sacrificed me to protect was entirely destroyed. I stood up from my desk, grabbed my coat, and walked out of the office. The cool London air hit my face as I stepped out of the corporate building. I felt a profound sense of weightlessness. For 33 years, I had carried the burden of being the disappointment of the family. Now I was simply a spectator watching a controlled demolition. Over the next 48 hours, the dominoes fell exactly as I had calculated. The Securities and Exchange Commission did not waste any time once they received my detailed forensic dossier. They immediately coordinated with federal authorities in the United States to freeze all domestic and international accounts associated with the fake startup. Madison and Andre were on the 5th day of their lavish Bora Bora honeymoon when the federal freeze took effect. I learned the details later through the frantic public meltdown Madison broadcasted to her remaining social media followers. They had been dining at an exclusive 5-star Overwater restaurant when Andre attempted to pay the astronomical bill. His sleek metal credit card was declined. He tried a second card and then a third. All were instantly declined. The resort management quickly realized they were hosting guests with entirely frozen assets. They locked Madison and Andre out of their luxury bungalow and confiscated their designer luggage until the outstanding balance was settled. Of course, they had no way to settle it. Andre was arrested by international authorities right there in the resort lobby on an extradition warrant for federal wire fraud and operating a massive Ponzi scheme. Madison posted a hysterical video from the island airport claiming they were being framed. But the internet had already turned on her. Her influencer sponsors dropped her overnight, leaving her completely stranded and humiliated on a global scale. Back in Connecticut, the situation for Catherine and William was even more catastrophic. The Newport Coastal Castle did exactly what they promised. The venue owner filed a massive civil lawsuit against my parents for breach of contract and fraud, because my parents had signed the final liability paperwork as the official hosts of the event. They were legally on the hook for the bounce $67,000, plus exorbitant legal fees and punitive damages. They tried to hire a defense attorney, but quickly realized they had absolutely no liquid capital left to pay retainer fees. Every cent of their savings was tied up in the home equity line of credit they had foolishly handed over to Andre, without the ability to pay the bank. The $300,000 home equity loan. My parents officially defaulted. The bank initiated foreclosure proceedings on their pristine suburban retirement house. The very home they had used as a status symbol to judge everyone else was suddenly adorned with a bright yellow bank auction notice on the front lawn. The country club friends they had tried so desperately to impress abandoned them immediately. High society has no tolerance for financial ruin, especially when it is tied to a highly publicized federal criminal investigation involving wire fraud. My parents were shunned, socially exiled, and forced to pack their belongings into rented moving trucks under the cover of darkness to avoid the judgmental stares of their former neighbors. Desperation makes people incredibly predictable. Despite my strict communication blockade, they tried to reach me through every possible back channel. William created new email addresses to bypass my filters, sending lengthy, manipulative messages demanding that I bail them out. He claimed that since I had a high-paying corporate job, I owed it to the family to save them from homelessness. Catherine attempted to call my firm directly, crying to the receptionist that it was a family emergency, and she needed me to wire them enough cash to secure a modest apartment. I simply instructed building security to screen all calls from the United States and delete any emails containing their names. I did not owe them a single penny. They had chosen their fake billionaire son-in-law over me, and now they were paying the ultimate price for their blind greed. Andre was eventually sentenced to 15 years in federal prison for defrauding dozens of investors and laundering the stolen capital. Madison, having lost her fake wealth and her online reputation, was forced to file for bankruptcy. She moved into a cramped studio apartment and had to get a minimum wage retail job to survive a fate she once deemed worse than death. Catherine and William moved into a tiny rental unit on the outskirts of the city, living entirely on their modest Social Security checks. They spent their days blaming each other for the collapse of their perfect lives, trapped in a miserable marriage with no money and no social standing left to shield them from reality. As for me, my career skyrocketed. The meticulous nature of my whistleblower report caught the attention of the executive board at my firm. I was promoted to a senior directorship overseeing international fraud compliance. I bought my own beautiful flat in central London, spending my weekends exploring Europe and traveling the world on my own terms, entirely free from the toxic shadow of my family. I learned the most valuable lesson of my life during this ordeal. Blood does not automatically make someone family, and shared DNA is not a valid excuse to tolerate continuous disrespect. If you are watching this and you are dealing with manipulative, narcissistic relatives who drain your energy and finances, hear this clearly. You are allowed to walk away. You are allowed to protect your peace and your bank account. You do not owe loyalty to people who view you as an expandable resource or an inconvenient accessory. Sometimes the most empowering thing you can do is lock the door and let them face the consequences of their own toxic choices. Have you ever had to legally, financially, or emotionally cut off a toxic family member? Share your story in the comments below. Do not forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more stories about reclaiming your power and letting karma do its job. The heavy leather seat of the business class cabin reclined smoothly as the aircraft leveled out over the Atlantic Ocean. I watched the sprawling lights of the American coastline fade into the dark water below. The quiet hum of the jet engines provided a stark contrast to the absolute chaos I had just left behind in Rhode Island. A flight attendant stopped by my pod and placed a glass of sparkling water on the console. I thanked her and turned my attention back to the window. My mind was sharp and entirely clear. There was no sadness or regret regarding my decision to initiate the fraud investigation. Instead, I felt a profound sense of analytical satisfaction. I had finally quantified the exact cost of my family and their toxic delusions. The $67,000 they had brazenly attempted to steal from my account was merely a symptom of a much larger disease. It was the desperate final act of people who had spent their entire lives worshipping an illusion. I took a slow sip of my water and allowed myself to dissect the psychological architecture of the ecosystem my parents inhabited. Catherine and William built their entire existence around the perceptions of their suburban neighbors in their pristine Connecticut neighborhood. Your value as a human being is measured exclusively by the badge on your car, the zip code of your real estate, and the exclusivity of your country club membership. They never cultivated genuine friendships or pursued actual intellectual interests. Their social circle was a viciously competitive arena where everyone smiled to your face and relentlessly judged your financial standing behind your back. I always despised that environment. From a young age, I recognized the fragile nature of their reality. They bought luxury items on credit to impress people they secretly hated. They projected an image of flawless affluence while quietly stressing over monthly statements and mortgage rates. Because I refused to participate in their shallow performance, they branded me a failure. I pursued a career in auditing because I value empirical truth. Numbers do not care about your social media aesthetic. Data does not lie to impress the neighbors. My commitment to reality made me an outcast in a house built entirely on aggressive vanity and financial pretense. Then came Madison, the quintessential golden child. She was the perfect product of their superficial environment. Madison never developed a single marketable skill or demonstrated any genuine ambition. Her entire identity was tied to her physical appearance and her ability to curate a visually pleasing lifestyle for the internet. Catherine and William enabled her delusion at every turn. They funded her expensive habits and praised her superficial milestones because she looked good in family photographs. She was a human prop. They used to signal their own success to their peers. When Madison introduced them to Andre, the family dynamic reached a level of toxic absurdity that I could scarcely comprehend. Andre was the ultimate prize in their twisted game of social climbing. He was charismatic, sharply dressed, and possessed a vocabulary heavily saturated with technological jargon and venture capital buzzwords. As an African-American tech entrepreneur, claiming to be on the verge of a massive public offering, he provided my parents with the exact narrative they craved. They envisioned themselves as the progressive, wealthy in-laws of a Silicon Valley billionaire. They were so blinded by their own greed that they completely ignored every glaring warning sign. I saw the red flags immediately. True wealth is often quiet and understated. Andre was loud, flashy, and excessively eager to discuss his supposed fortune. He wore tailored suits that looked slightly too new and drove leased sports cars that did not align with the typical behavior of a founder reinvesting capital into a growing company. He spoke in broad, glittering generalizations about blockchain and decentralized finance, but routinely failed to answer basic inquiries regarding his revenue models or regulatory compliance protocols. Any competent investor would have requested a comprehensive audit before handing over a single dollar. But Catherine and William are not competent investors. They are arrogant suburbanites desperate for a shortcut to the upper echelon of the elite. They wanted the Hamptons vacation house and the private jet lifestyle so badly that they completely suspended their critical thinking. Andre recognized their vulnerability instantly. He identified their deep-seated insecurities and played them with masterful precision. He fed their egos, praised their taste, and promised them a future of unimaginable luxury. He turned my parents into eager, willing participants in their own absolute financial destruction. As the flight attendant returned to collect my empty glass, I opened my laptop and reviewed the preliminary data I had compiled in the airport lounge. The sheer audacity of their choices was staggering. To maintain the illusion of their billionaire son-in-law, Catherine and William had leveraged the only genuine asset they possessed. They took out a $300,000 home equity line of credit on their retirement property and handed the cash directly to a professional con artist. They literally sold their future to buy a temporary fantasy. And when the reality of their bankruptcy loomed over the wedding day, they chose to commit a federal crime rather than admit they were broke. They stole my credit card information to keep the music playing because the thought of facing their social circle as victims of a scam was worse to them than the prospect of going to prison. The irony was almost poetic in its cruelty. They had physically barred me from entering the castle because I did not fit their carefully curated aesthetic, while simultaneously using my stolen financial identity to pay for the very doors they slammed in my face. I closed the laptop and rested my head against the comfortable seat. The airplane hurtled through the dark sky, carrying me back to my quiet, stable, and fiercely independent life in London. The trap was set, and I was entirely at peace. The flight across the Atlantic felt incredibly short. While the other passengers in the business class cabins slept or watched movies, I remained glued to my screen. I compiled the digital evidence harvested from corporate registries and drafted a whistleblower report detailing the fraudulent nature of Andre's startup. I outlined the fake board of directors, the hidden criminal record of his chief financial officer, and the highly suspicious flow of capital involving my parents' home equity line of credit. I attached the IP logs showing the unauthorized transaction. By the time the plane descended into London, I had an ironclad dossier ready for federal authorities. I did not hit send. I wanted the bank chargeback to hit the venue first. The chaos needed to start precisely on my schedule. When I landed, I turned off airplane mode. My phone immediately erupted with buzzing. There were dozens of text messages, missed calls, and social media tags. I opened Instagram. Madison had wasted no time weaponizing the situation for her influencer narrative. Her latest post featured a professionally edited photograph of her and Andre kissing under the venue archway. The caption was pure psychological manipulation. It read, "Sending prayers to my older sister today. We had to make the heartbreaking decision to have security escort her away from our wedding venue. Her jealousy and mental instability became a safety risk for our guests. It is devastating when family tries to destroy your happiness. But Andre and I refuse to let toxic energy dim our light. Thank you to our real family for surrounding us with so much love and protection today." The comments were predictable. Followers and extended family members praised her bravery. My phone was flooded with angry text messages from aunts and cousins. They called me a jealous monster and a profound disappointment. They accused me of sabotaging my sister because I lacked a partner. In their twisted reality, my parents were saints for protecting the bride from my tantrum. I did not reply. I simply took screenshots of Madison's post and the hateful texts, saving them into a designated folder. They were defaming me while spending money stolen from my credit card to fund the event they kicked me out of. The sheer audacity was impressive. I flagged a taxi outside the terminal and gave the driver my address. I watched the familiar gray streets of London roll by, feeling completely detached from the manufactured drama exploding on my phone. When I finally stepped into my high-rise apartment overlooking the Thames River, I dropped my luggage by the door and walked straight to my home office. I bypassed the shower and the coffee maker. I turned on my 3 large monitors and woke up my auditing workstation. It was time to map out the exact architecture of Andre's fraudulent empire. I pulled the corporate tax filings for his company and started tracing the origin of his supposed venture capital funding. The money was not coming from legitimate investment firms. The incoming wire transfers were originating from a series of decentralized cryptocurrency wallets and obscure regional banks. I ran the routing numbers and discovered that these accounts were linked to predatory high-interest personal loans and home equity lines of credit, just like the one my parents had taken out. Andre was not a tech visionary. He was running an affinity fraud scheme targeting older upper-middle-class suburbanites who desperately wanted to be part of the next big technology boom. He used his charm, his expensive suits, and his sophisticated vocabulary to convince people like my parents to hand over their retirement savings. He then used the fresh capital from new victims to pay small initial returns to older victims, creating the illusion of a profitable business. But the vast majority of the cash was being siphoned directly into his personal offshore accounts to fund his lavish lifestyle. He was driving a luxury sports car and wearing $50,000 watches entirely funded by the stolen equity of his victims' homes. My parents had handed him $300,000 of their own financial security. They had mortgaged their future to buy a front-row seat to a mirage. And because that money had evaporated into Andre's pockets, they had been forced to commit wire fraud using my credit card just to avoid the social humiliation of a canceled wedding. I spent the next 3 days living in a state of absolute focus. I went to my corporate job during the day conducting legitimate audits for my firm. At night, I returned to my apartment and monitored the digital trap I had set. I watched Madison's social media accounts closely. She posted daily updates from her honeymoon in Bora Bora. There were pictures of her and Andre drinking champagne on private yachts, lounging in overwater bungalows, and eating caviar on pristine white sand beaches. Every post was tagged with captions about living a blessed and abundant life. They were burning through thousands of dollars a day. Money that rightfully belonged to the victims of Andre's Ponzi scheme. Money that had been drained from my parents' retirement home. I watched them flaunt their stolen wealth with a cold, calculating patience. I knew exactly what was happening behind the scenes in the banking system. The provisional credit my card issuer had granted the wedding venue was moving through the automated clearinghouse network. It was approaching the final stage of settlement where the fraud alert would trigger the automatic reversal. I did not warn my parents. I did not text my sister. I simply went about my routine maintaining complete radio silence. I let them enjoy the sunshine, the luxury, and the delusion of their superiority. I let them believe they had successfully disposed of me and gotten away with a massive financial crime. I let them climb as high as possible so the fall would be absolutely catastrophic. Their impending destruction was going to be an absolute masterpiece. Indeed. I opened my primary auditing software. What I had uncovered in the airport lounge was merely the surface level of Andre's deception. A quick database search is enough to confirm a suspicion, but it is never enough to secure a federal indictment. To guarantee that Andre would spend the next decade in a federal penitentiary, I needed to construct a watertight forensic dossier. I needed account numbers, transaction timestamps, and irrefutable proof of money laundering. I pulled up the official website for his company and initiated a deep data scrape. The first step in dismantling a financial criminal is mapping their digital architecture. Andre was sloppy. He relied heavily on the assumption that his victims would be too intimidated by complex technological jargon to actually verify his claims. He thought throwing around words like blockchain integration and decentralized ledger would blind people to the fact that his company had no actual product. I started by dismantling his professional network. I navigated to the corporate LinkedIn page for his company. It boasted over 50,000 followers and showcased a robust team of executive leadership. To the untrained eye, it looked like a thriving enterprise. I ran a diagnostic script to analyze the follower engagement. The results were laughable. Over 95% of his followers were bot accounts purchased from a click farm in Eastern Europe. The engagement was entirely artificial. Next, I turned my attention to the individual profiles of his supposed board members and executive staff. I had already identified the chief financial officer as a convicted felon. but I needed to expose the entire organizational chart. I isolated the profile pictures of his 5 lead developers and ran them through a reverse image recognition database. The results populated on my second monitor in seconds. His lead software engineer was a stock photograph of a dental hygienist from Ohio. His director of marketing was a computer-generated image pulled from an artificial intelligence face generator. Andre had fabricated an entire corporate staff out of thin air to create the illusion of a massive operational team. He created dozens of fake employee profiles and had them endorse his own skills to build artificial credibility. He wrote glowing recommendations for himself using these phantom accounts, praising his visionary leadership and financial genius. It was a digital echo chamber of narcissism and fraud. I meticulously took screenshots of every fake profile, capturing the source code and the creation dates. I compiled this into a designated folder labeled Artificial Corporate Structure. This would prove to investigators that his entire operation was premeditated deception from day one, with his professional facade thoroughly documented. I moved on to the most critical phase of the audit. Fraudsters like Andre never keep their stolen funds in a single domestic account. They use a technique called layering to obscure the origin and destination of the capital. I accessed international corporate registry databases and began tracing the business license he registered in Delaware. Just as I suspected, the Delaware entity was entirely owned by a secondary holding company registered in Nevada. I pulled the Nevada incorporation documents and found that it was owned by yet another shell company, this one based in the Cayman Islands. He had constructed a Russian nesting doll of corporate entities designed to exhaust anyone trying to follow the cash. But I do this for a living. I thrive on untangling financial webs. I leveraged my firm's global database access to pierce the corporate veil of the Cayman Islands entity. I tracked the registration numbers and finally hit the jackpot. The Cayman company funneled its assets directly into 2 private offshore bank accounts located in Cyprus. I stared at the routing numbers glowing on my screen. This was the dark heart of his operation. When gullible investors like my parents wired their retirement savings to his domestic company, the money did not go towards software development or operational costs. It was immediately bounced through the Nevada shell company, filtered through the Cayman Islands holding firm, and quietly deposited into the personal Cyprus accounts. I needed to prove how he spent that stolen capital. Using the routing data, I initiated a targeted trace on the outgoing expenditures from the Cyprus accounts. The transaction history painted a vivid and sickening picture of his daily life. There were no payroll disbursements. There were no vendor payments for office space or technology infrastructure. Every single outgoing wire transfer was categorized under personal luxury expenses. I logged a massive payment to a high-end luxury car dealership in Miami. That was the custom Porsche he loved to park in my parents' driveway. I found recurring monthly charges to an exclusive tailor in Manhattan, confirming how he acquired those impeccable suits that made my father view him as a business prodigy. Then I found the most damning transactions of all. I traced a series of exorbitant payments made over the last 2 weeks to a luxury travel concierge service. I cross-referenced the dates and amounts. It matched perfectly with the overwater bungalow resort in Bora Bora, where he and my sister were currently posting their honeymoon updates. He was literally buying my sister expensive cocktails using the stolen equity of my parents' home. The depravity of his financial crimes was staggering. He had walked into their house, drank their wine, smiled in their faces, and systematically drained their life savings to fund his own superficial existence. And Catherine and William were so blinded by their desperation for high society status that they handed him the keys to their destruction on a silver platter. I compiled all the routing numbers, the wire transfer receipts, and the corporate ownership documents into a single encrypted master file. I organized the data chronologically, creating an undeniable narrative of felony wire fraud and money laundering. I leaned back in my chair and rubbed my eyes. The sun was beginning to rise over the London skyline, casting a pale morning light across my monitors. My deep dive forensic audit was complete. I I had successfully dismantled his entire fictional universe. The federal authorities would not even have to work for this conviction. I had packaged the entire prosecution into a neat digital bow. The truth was locked, secured, and ready to be weaponized. The financial architecture of a Ponzi scheme is notoriously difficult to maintain because it requires a constant exponential influx of new capital to survive. I poured another cup of black coffee and opened a fresh spreadsheet. I needed to dissect the precise anatomy of Andre's fraud. I began mapping the inflow of funds matching every incoming wire transfer against the corresponding outgoing payments. The pattern that emerged was terrifying in its simplicity. Andre had zero actual revenue. He did not sell software. He did not license intellectual property. He did not provide financial consulting services. His corporate bank accounts recorded absolutely zero incoming funds from legitimate business-to-business transactions. Every single dollar flowing into his domestic accounts came directly from individual personal checking accounts. He was targeting a very specific demographic. I ran a background analysis on the names attached to the incoming wire transfers. These were not institutional investors or venture capital firms. They were dentists, retired real estate brokers, small business owners, and country club socialites. They were people who possessed significant disposable income, but lacked the technical expertise to properly evaluate a decentralized finance platform. Andre preyed on their fear of missing out on the next massive technology boom. He sold them a highly exclusive invite-only investment opportunity. By demanding strict non-disclosure agreements, he ensured his victims could not discuss their investments with independent financial advisors, who would have immediately spotted the glaring red flags. I tracked a specific transaction from a retired couple in Florida who had wired him $200,000. Less than 48 hours after their funds hit Andre's domestic account. He executed 3 outgoing wire transfers. The first transfer was for $15,000 sent to an early investor in Chicago labeled as a quarterly dividend payout. This is the hallmark of a classic Ponzi operation. He used the Florida couple's fresh capital to pay fake returns to an older investor, thereby manufacturing the illusion of profitability. The Chicago investors, seeing this impressive dividend, would likely leave their principal investment untouched and perhaps even refer their wealthy friends to Andre. It was a vicious, self-sustaining cycle of deceit, but the fake dividends only accounted for a small fraction of the stolen money. The second outgoing wire from the Florida couple's capital was a $50,000 transfer to Andre's offshore Cyprus account. The remaining $135,000 was immediately drained through a series of high-end luxury purchases. I matched the timestamps of the debit transactions to Madison's social media timeline. The correlation was flawless and entirely sickening. On the exact day Andre drained the Florida couple's investment, Madison posted a photo of herself holding a rare designer handbag that retails for over $40,000. Her caption read, "Spoiled by my amazing future husband." She was literally carrying the stolen retirement funds of a stranger on her arm while bragging about her blessed lifestyle. The sheer scale of his personal expenditures was mind-boggling. Andre treated his investors' capital as his personal piggy bank. I found receipts for private jet charters to Miami 5IP table service at exclusive nightclubs and tens of thousands of dollars spent at high-stakes casino tables. He was burning through capital at an astonishing rate to project the image of a billionaire tech mogul. He understood that in the circles my parents moved in, perception is reality. If he drove a custom sports car and paid for $30,000 dinners, people would automatically assume he was successful. They would never demand to see his audited financial statements because his lifestyle served as all the proof they needed. But a burn rate this aggressive creates a massive structural vulnerability. A Ponzi scheme only survives if the influx of new money exceeds the outgoing structural vulnerability. A Ponzi scheme only survives if the influx of new money exceeds the outgoing fake dividends and the scammer's personal spending. By cross-referencing his monthly expenditures with his incoming investments, I calculated his financial runway. The numbers revealed a desperate truth. Andre's scheme had been quietly collapsing for the past 6 months. The well of gullible country club investors was drying up. He was running out of fresh marks to defraud. He needed a massive injection of capital just to keep the offshore accounts from emptying completely and to continue paying the minimum required dividends to keep his early investors from calling the authorities. This desperation perfectly explained the timeline of his engagement to my sister. He did not ask Madison to marry him out of love. He proposed because integrating himself officially into my family gave him direct access to my parents' assets. He spent a year grooming Catherine and William, softening their defenses with expensive dinners and promises of unimaginable wealth. He recognized their desperate need for social elevation and exploited it flawlessly. When his fraud operation reached a critical breaking point, he pitched them the ultimate insider deal. He convinced them to leverage their fully paid-off house to secure his future. That $300,000 home equity line of credit was not an investment. It was a lifeline for a dying scam. I traced the exact trajectory of my parents' money. The moment their $300,000 hit Andre's account, it was instantly devoured by his outstanding liabilities. He used $80,000 to pay off angry early investors who were demanding to liquidate their positions. He wired another $100,000 to his offshore accounts to hide it from domestic authorities. He blew the rest on maintaining the illusion leading up to the wedding, including the designer tuxedo he planned to wear and the extravagant honeymoon resort in Bora Bora. He had completely exhausted my parents' financial resources. They were entirely tapped out. And because Andre's fraudulent empire was running on fumes, he had absolutely zero liquid cash left to cover the final $67,000 invoice for the Coastal Castle venue. The grand illusion was colliding violently with mathematical reality. They were trapped in a corner of their own making. That is why they resorted to stealing my credit card information. It was the frantic flailing of people who realized the ground was crumbling beneath their feet, but refused to let the party stop. I saved the final spreadsheet, locking the data into an encrypted drive. The anatomy of the fraud was perfectly documented. Andre was a predator, but my parents were eager, willing accomplices in their own destruction. The digital trail of Andre's scheme was horrifying, but the origin of his final capital injection required a more granular examination to fully comprehend the scale of their ruin. I needed to see the exact legal mechanics of how my parents handed over their lives to a criminal. I closed the offshore banking tabs and opened a secure connection to the Connecticut Municipal Property Database. Accessing county clerk records is a tedious process, but the data it yields is absolute. Property deeds do not lie. Mortgages do not care about your country club status. I entered my parents' home address into the search query and waited for the public records to populate on my screen. The screen refreshed, displaying a chronological list of every legal action tied to their pristine suburban estate. For 30 years, there was nothing but the original purchase deed and a standard mortgage discharge notice from when they finally paid off the house 5 years ago. It was a clean, solid financial history. Then I saw the newest entry. It was filed exactly 8 months prior. I clicked on the hyperlink document to download the digitized copy of the lien. I needed to see exactly how desperately Catherine and William had compromised their future. As the document rendered on my high-resolution monitor, I leaned closer, studying the official notary stamps and the signatures at the bottom of the page. It was a home equity line of credit, but it was not issued by a standard reputable financial institution. My parents had excellent credit histories, so a traditional bank would normally approve this type of loan. However, traditional banks also require rigorous underwriting processes. The lender listed on this deed of trust was not a national bank. It was a predatory hard money lending firm based out of a strip mall in New Jersey. My eyes scanned the loan terms and a cold chill ran down my spine. This was not a standard financial product. It was an act of absolute desperation. The interest rate attached to the $300,000 principal was a staggering 15%. Worse, It was structured with an interest-only payment plan for the first 12 months, followed by a massive balloon payment for the entire principal. My parents had signed away the deed to their fully owned retirement home for a high-risk loan that guaranteed their financial ruin. They had walked into a financial slaughterhouse entirely willingly. Why would two functioning adults bypass their primary bank and accept such devastating loan terms? The answer was glaringly obvious. They needed the money immediately. Andre must have created a false sense of urgency, a manufactured deadline for his fake initial public offering. He likely told them that if they did not provide the capital within 48 hours, they would lose their exclusive founder's shares. Hard money lenders will wire cash in 3 days if you hand over your property deed as collateral. Catherine and William were completely blinded by their extreme greed and quickly bypassed every logical financial safeguard. I zoomed in on the signatures at the bottom of the document, her elegant cursive and his sharp, aggressive scroll. They signed this paperwork together. There was no coercion. There was no forged signature like the one they used on my credit card. They sat in a room with a notary. Public looked at a contract that put their entire life work on the line and eagerly signed it away to fund a mirage. The ultimate betrayal was not just their financial stupidity. It was the specific timeline of when this exact event occurred. I cross-referenced the date of the loan origination with my personal calendar. 8 months ago. That was the exact same week Catherine called me to complain about how ungrateful I was for missing a family dinner. I vividly remembered that phone call. She had bared me for prioritizing my corporate auditing career over family bonding. She told me that money was not everything, and that I needed to learn how to be a highly supportive sister, while she was lecturing me about moral superiority. She was literally sitting on a ticking time bomb of predatory debt. The hypocrisy was suffocating. They spent the last 8 months parading around their affluent neighborhood, bragging about their upcoming early retirement and their younger daughter's extravagant wedding. They hosted engagement parties. They bought imported expensive champagne. And they looked down their noses at anyone who did not match their perceived level of wealth. The entire time they were living in a house they no longer owned. They were mere tenants in their own lives, existing entirely on borrowed money and borrowed time. The house of cards was not just fragile. It was already actively collapsing around them. By draining the $300,000 and handing it to Andre, they had doomed themselves. Andre had immediately vaporized that capital to pay off older investors and fund his luxury lifestyle, leaving my parents with a massive monthly interest payment they could barely afford. When the wedding venue demanded the final $67,000, my parents had absolutely zero financial liquidity left. They could not go back to the hard money lender. They could not ask their traditional bank. Their backs were against a reinforced concrete wall. That is exactly why they stole my credit card information. It was not an arrogant assumption that I would cover the bill. It was an act of pure panicked survival. If the wedding got canceled, their social circle would ask questions. If questions were asked, the facade of Andre wealth would shatter. If the facade shattered, my parents would have to admit they had been conned out of their house. They committed a federal crime against their own daughter simply to delay their inevitable public humiliation for a few more days. I exported the property records and added them to my comprehensive federal dossier. The trap was perfectly constructed, closing the final loophole. The final pieces of the puzzle were firmly in place. I had successfully reverse-engineered Andre's entire operation and documented my parents' devastating complicity. Now it was time to synthesize this raw data into a weapon. I needed to draft a whistleblower report so comprehensive and legally airtight that the federal authorities would have no choice but to act immediately. I opened a blank document and began structuring the dossier. The objective was clarity and undeniable proof. I created a master index dividing the evidence into 3 distinct categories. The first section focused exclusively on the wire fraud and credit card theft perpetrated against me. I attached the official dispute confirmation from American Express along with the detailed transaction logs. I then inserted the most critical piece of evidence, the IP address tracking report proving the forged digital signature originated from Andre's location. This established the immediate felony and linked Andre directly to the fraudulent charge. The second section detailed the anatomy of the Ponzi scheme. I provided the corporate registry documents for his shell companies exposing the fraudulent nature of his board of directors and highlighting his chief financial officer's criminal record. I mapped the flow of funds using the routing numbers and international transfer records, demonstrating how investor capital was diverted to offshore accounts in Cyprus. I included the cross-reference timeline matching his luxury expenditures with the exact dates he received new investments. This section transformed him from a simple scammer into the orchestrator of a highly sophisticated interstate financial crime. The third and final section documented the source of his most recent capital injection. I attached the public property records detailing my parents' $300,000 home equity line of credit. I explicitly connected this predatory loan to the final massive transfer that kept Andre's scheme afloat just long enough for him to abscond to his honeymoon. This demonstrated the ongoing and active nature of the fraud, proving that he was still actively recruiting and draining new victims. I reviewed the dossier. It was 80 pages of undeniable documented federal crimes. I saved the file to a secure encrypted drive and prepared to initiate the formal reporting process. I navigated to the official TIP portal for the United States Securities and Exchange Commission. As a financial auditor, I was intimately familiar with their reporting protocols. I bypassed the standard consumer complaint forms and accessed the dedicated portal for corporate whistleblowers. I filled out the intake questionnaire detailing the nature of the fraud, the estimated number of victims, and the total amount of misappropriated funds. In the narrative section, I provided a clinical objective summary of Andre's operation, emphasizing the use of unregistered securities and fraudulent financial projections to solicit capital. I uploaded the encrypted dossier, ensuring all identifying information was correctly categorized. I hit submit and received a confirmation tracking number. But the SEC moves slowly, often taking months to initiate a formal investigation. I did not have months. I needed immediate tactical intervention. I needed law enforcement capable of executing federal warrants. I navigated to the Internet Crime Complaint Center operated by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I submitted a secondary report, this one focusing specifically on the wire fraud, money laundering, and the international transfer of stolen assets. I emphasized that the perpetrator was currently outside the jurisdiction of the United States, utilizing stolen funds to finance his international travel. This critical detail elevated the urgency of the report, ensuring it would be flagged for immediate review by an active agent. I finalized the submissions and closed my browser. The digital guillotine was primed and waiting. The federal machinery had been activated. It was no longer a matter of if Andre would be apprehended, but when. And when the FBI began tracing the stolen capital, they would inevitably arrive at the doorstep of my parents' home, the very house they no longer owned. I leaned back in my chair, the silence of my London apartment, amplifying the magnitude of what I had just accomplished. I had effectively orchestrated the total destruction of the illusion my family had dedicated their lives to maintaining. They had prioritized status and a fake billionaire over their own daughter. Now they would reap the absolute devastation of their choices. I walked to my kitchen and poured a fresh cup of coffee. The sun was fully up, casting a bright, relentless light across the city. The next few days required absolute patience. I had to let the bank chargeback process naturally. I had to let the federal authorities digest the dossier and initiate their protocols. I had to maintain total radio silence and allow my family to remain blissfully ignorant of the impending catastrophe. I opened my phone and checked my messages. The family group chat was still active, buzzing with photos from the wedding and updates from the honeymoon. My aunts and cousins were still trading gossip and praising Madison's perfect life. My parents were still accepting congratulations and basking in the glow of their perceived high society triumph. They were dancing on the deck of a sinking ship, entirely unaware that I had just detonated the hull. I silenced the notifications and placed my phone face down on the counter. The work was done. The trap was set. Now I simply had to wait for the inevitable moment when the illusion shattered and the real world came crashing down. Day 2 arrived with the steady drizzle typical of a London morning. I woke up at exactly 6 o'clock feeling an unparalleled sense of tranquility. There were no frantic text messages from Catherine demanding I apologize for my behavior at the venue. There were no passive-aggressive emails from William threatening to cut me out of the family will. They were completely silent, operating under the arrogant assumption that they had successfully neutralized the threat I posed to their social standing. I made myself a shot of espresso and opened my personal phone to check the digital theater. Madison was already working overtime to construct her perfect narrative. Her Instagram feed was an absolute masterclass in fraudulent luxury. They had arrived at their resort in Bora Bora, and the content was nauseatingly excessive. The first post was a cinematic video of a private seaplane landing on crystal-clear turquoise water. The caption declared that her husband rented the aircraft just for them. I looked at the gleaming white seaplane on my screen and ran a mental calculation. A private charter of that magnitude in French Polynesia costs approximately $5,000 for a single hour. I knew precisely where that $5,000 came from. It was sliced directly from the home equity line of credit my parents had foolishly handed over to a con artist. As I swiped to her next photo, the absurdity only deepened. Madison was posing on the deck of a massive overwater bungalow wearing a silk designer robe that retailed for more than my first car. She was holding a glass of vintage champagne, toasting to her flawless new life. The geotag confirmed they were staying at a premier luxury resort in their most exclusive estate suite. That specific suite runs upwards of $8,000 per night. They were booked for a 2-stay, doing the math in my head. I realized Andre was burning through over $100,000 on the honeymoon alone. He was bleeding my parents' retirement fund completely dry to buy likes and comments from strangers on the internet. I went to work on day 3, feeling entirely detached from the unfolding tragedy. My corporate colleagues noticed my excellent mood. I navigated my audit meetings with razor-sharp precision, closing out compliance reports ahead of schedule. Meanwhile, my phone sat in my desk drawer, silently accumulating updates from the family group chat. Catherine was sending dozens of messages to her siblings and cousins, bragging about the exclusive excursions Andre had booked for the newlyweds. She typed out long paragraphs detailing a private scuba diving tour with manta rays and an underwater dining experience that required a specialized submarine capsule. She was gorging herself on the envy of our extended relatives, completely blind to the fact that she was financing the entire charade with her own imminent bankruptcy. Day 4 arrived, and the tension in my apartment was electric. The international banking system is a massive invisible machine that operates on strict and flexible timelines. When I initiated the fraud protocol, the bank placed a provisional hold on the funds. This hold is essentially a ghost transaction. It shows up on the merchant account as a pending approval, giving the venue owner the false confidence to proceed with his business operations. But underneath that digital green checkmark, the automated clearinghouse network was actively investigating the authorization protocols. By the end of day 4, the network algorithms had officially flagged the missing digital signature and matched it with the fraudulent internet protocol address I had provided. The reversal was quietly loading in the background of the financial matrix. I spent the evening of day 4 sitting on my velvet sofa, watching the final hours of my family's delusion slip away. Madison posted a live video update from the deck of a chartered catamaran. She was wearing a massive diamond necklace that she claimed Andre surprised her with at breakfast. The diamonds sparkled under the tropical sun while she giggled into the camera, telling her followers how incredibly blessed she felt to be married to a self-made tech genius. Andre stepped into the frame wearing designer linen, holding a premium cigar, and kissing her on the cheek. They looked like the ultimate power couple. They looked untouchable. But I knew the truth. That necklace was stolen property. That catamaran was rented with blood money. And that tech genius was a federal criminal counting down his final hours of freedom. I opened my banking application one last time before bed on the fourth night. The pending status on the $67,450 charge was beginning to transition. Internal codes were shifting from temporary hold to permanent rejection. The banking system was preparing to execute the final clawback. I felt a surge of pure, unadulterated justice. For years. Catherine and William had told me I was a failure because I did not prioritize high society aesthetics. They had constantly belittled my career in financial technology, treating my profession as a boring, mundane choice compared to Madison's glamorous lifestyle. They had chosen to align themselves with a charismatic criminal because he offered them the illusion of elite status. They craved that external validation more than they loved their own flesh and blood. Now the boring financial technology auditor was the architect of their total destruction. I had not yelled at them. I had not begged them to love me. I had simply stepped out of the way and let their own breathtaking arrogance lead them straight off a cliff. The clock ticked past midnight, officially ushering in the fifth day. The banking system would process the reversal precisely at 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. When the venue owner opened his accounting software, he was going to see a massive financial crater where his profit should have been. The illusion was over. The honeymoon was dead. The real world was about to break down their doors. At exactly 2 p.m, London time, which was precisely 9 a.m. on the East Coast. I sat at my desk and refreshed the banking portal. The screen blinked and the data updated. The provisional credit vanished. A bold red indicator flashed across the transaction ledger reading, "Hard chargeback executed and fraud protocol finalized." The $67,450 was officially returned to my corporate account. The trap had snapped shut with absolute mathematical precision. Thousands of miles away in Newport, Rhode Island, the Coastal Castle venue owner arrived at his office. He was a seasoned businessman catering to the wealthy elite of New England. He dealt with demanding brides and massive budgets, expecting payments to clear without a second thought because his clientele did not bounce checks. He walked into his opulent suite, poured coffee, and woke his computer to review the weekly batches. Mr. Harrison logged into his merchant gateway, navigating to the Settled Transactions tab. He expected to see the massive payment from Madison and Andre's wedding deposited into his operating account. Instead, his dashboard displayed a glaring negative balance. An alert popped up notifying him of a funds reversal. He clicked the alert, frowning in confusion. The system displayed my Platinum card transaction. The status was not merely declined. It was marked with a federal code indicating an unauthorized fraudulent transaction involving identity theft and a forged digital signature. The owner stared at the screen, processing the magnitude of the deficit. He had already paid his catering staff, the florists, the valet attendants, the string quartet, and the bar vendors. He had exhausted tens of thousands of dollars of his own operating capital to fund the extravagant event based entirely on the false security of that pending transaction. Now the money was gone, violently ripped back through the banking network. He had essentially hosted a luxury gala for absolute free. Mr. Harrison immediately picked up his desk phone and dialed his merchant bank representative. He demanded an explanation, assuming it was a clerical error. The representative on the other end of the line quickly crushed that hope. She explained that the cardholder had filed a direct federal fraud dispute. She informed him that the Internet Protocol address used to sign the final authorization contract did not match the cardholder's location. The bank had verified the fraud, and the chargeback was permanent and non-negotiable. The representative advised him that the individuals who booked the venue had committed wire fraud. Panic and fury instantly consumed the venue owner. He pulled the client file for the wedding. The primary contacts listed were Catherine and William. They had signed the liability waivers as the official hosts of the event. They were the ones who had assured him the final payment was secured. They were the ones who smiled and drank his top-shelf champagne while knowing they were actively defrauding his business. He realized in that moment that he was not dealing with wealthy suburbanites experiencing a banking glitch. He was dealing with criminals who had orchestrated a massive theft. Mr. Harrison did not hesitate. He operated a lucrative business and did not tolerate theft. He immediately dialed his corporate attorney, instructing him to draft a civil lawsuit against Catherine and William for breach of contract and grand larceny. But he did not stop there, because the fraud involved stolen credit card information and forged signatures. It crossed into criminal territory. He contacted the local Rhode Island Police Department and filed a formal police report for felony theft of services. He handed over all the contact information, email addresses, and physical addresses he had on file for my parents and Andre. While Mr. Harrison was mobilizing his legal and law enforcement assets, I remained seated in my London office, watching the digital shockwaves ripple outward. I almost felt the atmospheric pressure dropping across the Atlantic. The financial mechanisms I had activated were now entirely autonomous. I did not need to lift another finger. The system was designed to protect assets and punish thieves with ruthless efficiency. I checked the offshore tracing program I had set up for Andre's accounts. The federal authorities had moved faster than I anticipated. The Cryate bank accounts that held his stolen investor capital, including my parents' $300,000 home equity loan, were now returning frozen status codes. The Securities and Exchange Commission had successfully locked down his entire financial network. Andre sat in a luxury overwater bungalow, completely cut off from his stolen wealth. He had no access to cash, no access to credit, and no way to pay for the exorbitant honeymoon he was currently broadcasting to the world. Madison was applying filters to photos, oblivious that she was stranded on a tropical island with a federal criminal. They were effectively broke, back in Connecticut. The sun was shining on my parents' pristine suburban neighborhood. Catherine was likely sitting on her patio drinking a morning mimosa and scrolling through Madison's social media updates. She probably felt immense relief believing they had successfully navigated the financial crisis. She thought she had outsmarted me, outsmarted the venue, and secured her daughter's place in the upper echelon of high society. She had absolutely no idea that a Category 5 financial hurricane had just made landfall on her doorstep. I checked the clock. It was 9:30 on the East Coast. Mr. Harrison would be making his phone calls right about now. He would not wait for business hours. A man who lost $70,000 does not exercise patience. He was going to dial Catherine's cell phone directly, and he was going to unleash hell. I grabbed my phone, ensuring the ringer volume was turned up. I wanted to hear her voice when her reality shattered. The trap had closed. The money was gone. The silence of the morning was about to be broken permanently. I smiled at the London skyline and waited for the incoming call. The phone on my desk began to vibrate violently against the glass surface. The caller identification displayed my mother's name. I let it ring 3 times, allowing her anxiety to peak before I finally pressed the accept button and brought the device to my ear. I did not offer a greeting. I simply listened to the chaotic sounds of hyperventilation echoing across the transatlantic connection. "Claire," Catherine shrieked, her voice entirely devoid of its usual country club polish. It was a raw, frantic sound resembling an animal caught in a snare. "Thank God you answered. You need to call your credit card company right this second. There has been a massive bank error. A catastrophic glitch. The wedding venue coordinator just called your father and threatened to call the police. They are saying the payment for the reception bounced. They are accusing us of theft. You need to call American Express and fix this glitch immediately before they ruin Madison's honeymoon." I leaned back in my ergonomic desk chair and swiveled to face the sprawling skyline of the city. My pulse was incredibly slow and steady. I let the silence stretch for a long, uncomfortable moment, forcing her to sit in the panic she had created. "Are you listening to me?" Catherine screamed, her pitch rising to a deafening level. This is a total disaster, mister. Harrison just screamed at your father. He said the $67,000 was reversed. He said the bank flagged it as fraud. You have to call them and clear this up. Tell them it was a perfectly normal family transaction. Tell them you authorized it. If you do not fix this right now, he is going to file a police report. He threatened to send detectives to our house. Claire, detectives to our house. The sheer desperation in her voice was intoxicating. She was begging me to commit perjury to save her from the consequences of her own felony. She wanted me to lie to a federal financial institution and pretend that I willingly funded a party I was physically barred from attending. Mom, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerously calm register. Take a breath and listen to yourself. You are asking me to tell my bank that I authorized a $67,000 charge for an event you explicitly kicked me out of. Does that sound like a plausible story to you? Catherine gasped loudly. We did not kick you out. We asked you to leave because you were causing a scene. You were ruining the aesthetic of your sister's special day. But that does not matter right now. What matters is that Andre had a temporary issue with his offshore transfer. His venture capital funds were delayed by a few days. We used your card on file because we knew you had the credit limit. We were going to pay you back next week. It was just a bridge loan between family members. You are going to call the bank right now and tell them it was a misunderstanding. Do you have any idea how humiliating this is for us? I felt a cold smile form on my face. A bridge loan. That was the phrase she decided to use to justify grand larceny. You stole my financial information to fund a party you physically barred me from attending, I replied coldly. You forged my digital signature on an invoice exceeding $60,000. That is not a bridge loan. That is not a misunderstanding. That is wire fraud. And my credit card is not a charity fund for people who treat me like disposable garbage. I heard rustling on the line, followed by William's booming voice. He had clearly grabbed the phone from Catherine, unable to handle the loss of control. Listen to me very carefully, you vindictive little brat. William barked. You are going to fix this immediately or I will personally sue you for defamation. We are your parents. You do not get to throw a temper tantrum and report us to the federal authorities just because you felt left out of a wedding. You are embarrassing this family. Andre is a highly respected entrepreneur, and you are jeopardizing his reputation with your petty jealousy. You really have no idea what is happening. Do you? William, I said, slicing through his arrogant delusion. You think this is about me being jealous of a wedding invitation? What are you talking about? He demanded, his voice wavering slightly. Now I opened the forensic audit file on my computer. I wanted to drag this out, but the sheer stupidity of his threats required an immediate reality check. There is no bank error, I stated cleanly. The payment bounced because I personally ordered the bank to reverse it. I reported the transaction as felony fraud. William let out a sharp, hard breath. You reversed it. You called the bank and reversed a payment for your own sister's wedding. Are you insane? Do you realize the legal jeopardy you just placed us in? The venue owner is threatening a massive civil lawsuit for breach of contract. We signed the liability paperwork. Claire, we are legally on the hook for that money. You need to call the bank back and authorize the charge, or we will lose everything. You already lost everything. William, I replied, my voice absolutely devoid of emotion. You lost everything the moment you handed your life savings to a professional scammer. And you sealed your fate the moment you decided to steal from a senior financial auditor to cover up your own bankruptcy. What exactly is she saying? Catherine cried out loudly in the background. William, what on earth is she talking about? I am talking about the fact that you are completely broke. I continued relentlessly. You have absolutely no money left to pay Mr. Harrison, because you gave it all to Andre, and I will never ever bail you out of a massive federal crime. The silence that followed my declaration was heavy and suffocating. I could practically hear the gears grinding in William's head as he tried to process the sheer magnitude of the information I had just dropped on him. Denial is a powerful psychological mechanism, especially for a man who has spent his entire life curating an image of infallible superiority. When he finally spoke, his voice shook with a dangerous, volatile rage that I had not heard since my teenage years. "You are a psychotic, jealous liar," William bellowed into the receiver, his words slurring slightly from the adrenaline. "You made this entire story up because you are bitter. You have always resented your sister. You have always hated that she found a successful man while you sit alone in a foreign country. Andre is a genius. He has venture capital backing. He has corporate board members. I have seen the prospectuses with my own eyes. You are trying to sabotage this family out of pure spite. But I will not let you. I am filing a massive defamation lawsuit against you. I will sue you for every penny. You will never work in finance again when I am finished with you." I listened to his tirade without interrupting. I wanted him to expend all his residual arrogance before I crushed it. "You are not going to sue anyone." "William," I replied, my voice maintaining its surgical precision. "Lawsuits require expensive attorneys, and you cannot afford a consultation fee. Your liquid assets are entirely gone. You drained your checking accounts to pay for Madison's bridal showers and rehearsal dinners, and you gave the remaining $300,000 of your net worth to a man who used it to buy a luxury sports car and a high-end wardrobe. That is an absolute fabrication," he shouted, his voice cracking, betraying deep-seated panic taking root in his chest. "Is it a fabrication?" I asked coldly. "Let us review the empirical data. 8 months ago, you and Catherine visited a strip mall in New Jersey. You walked into the office of a predatory hard money lender. You signed a deed of trust securing a home equity line of credit against your fully paid-off retirement property. The principal amount was exactly $300,000. The interest rate is a staggering 15%. You structured it with an interest-only payment plan for the first 12 months, followed by a massive balloon payment. You handed that cash directly to Andre under the delusion that you were securing founders' shares in an initial public offering. But Andre never registered any shares with the Securities and Exchange Commission. He just pocketed your cash to keep his Ponzi scheme afloat." William stopped breathing. The line went completely dead for several seconds. He knew I had the facts. He knew I could not possibly have invented the specific terms of a secret high-risk loan they had taken out across state lines. The realization that I was not bluffing, that I had forensically dismantled his entire financial reality, hit him with the force of a freight train. William Catherine whimpered in the background, her voice echoing through the receiver. "What is she saying, William? Tell me she is lying. Tell me our house is safe." He did not answer her. He could not. The illusion of his financial genius had evaporated, leaving him completely exposed. "You are going to lose the house," William Thie stated, presenting the facts without a shred of empathy. "You have a balloon payment coming due that you cannot fulfill. Mr. Harrison is going to win his civil lawsuit for the unpaid $67,000 venue bill. The judge will place a lien on whatever assets you have left. You are going to be evicted. You will have to declare bankruptcy. Your country club friends will read about the foreclosure in the local public notices. Every person you have ever tried to impress is going to know that you were conned by your own son-in-law and that you resorted to credit card fraud to hide your insolvency. Give me the phone." Catherine suddenly shrieked, wresting the device away from her husband. "Claire, please. You have to listen to me." Her tone had shifted entirely. The venomous arrogance she had wielded at the castle entrance was completely gone. In its place was pure desperation. "Claire. Honey, you are scaring us." Catherine sobbed. Her tears sounded genuine now, fueled by absolute terror. "You are our daughter. We are your family. You cannot just leave us in this situation. We made a mistake. We were under so much pressure with the wedding costs, and Andre promised us the money would be available. We just borrowed your card temporarily to avoid a crisis. It was a momentary lapse in judgment. Please, you have to fix this. You are so smart with money. You can call the bank and authorize the charge. We will figure out a way to pay you back. I promise we will make it right. You cannot let them take our home. You cannot ruin Madison's honeymoon. She is your sister. I closed my eyes and took a slow, deliberate breath. The sheer audacity of her plea was staggering. Less than a week ago, she had looked me in the eye and told me I was not fit to stand in the same room as her elite guests. She allowed security to threaten me. You are not my family, Catherine, I said, my voice dropping to an icy whisper. You threw me away because I did not fit your aesthetic. But the moment you need a scapegoat for your financial crimes, suddenly I am your daughter again. I am not a backup bank account. Please, Catherine begged, weeping openly. We will go to jail. I did not destroy your lives, I replied calmly. I simply handed authorities a map. You are entirely on your own. I ended the call immediately and placed my smartphone face down on the glass desk. The silence in my London office was absolute. I took a deep breath, letting the satisfaction of the moment wash over me. I had finally cut the cord. But I knew men like William. They do not accept defeat gracefully. They are accustomed to bullying their way out of consequences. True to form, less than 3 minutes later, the heavy black multi-line telephone on my corporate desk began to ring. It was an external international transfer from the main reception switchboard of my firm. I had blocked his cell phone number, so he bypassed my personal devices entirely and called my employer. I pressed the speaker button. Claire, he growled, his voice echoing through my office. Do not ever hang up on me again. You are acting like a petulant child. You will unblock your mother's number and you will explain exactly what you meant by handing authorities a map. You are making wild accusations to justify your petty revenge. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the desk. I am not making accusations. William, I replied, my voice completely devoid of emotion. I am stating empirical facts. You seem to think this is a family dispute. You think you can raise your voice and bully me into submitting to your reality. But you are no longer dealing with a daughter seeking your approval. You are dealing with a senior financial auditor who just caught you committing federal offenses. That is an absurd fabrication, he shouted. We did not commit any crimes. We authorized a payment using a card we had on file. It was a temporary bridge loan. We had every intention of paying you back. You did not authorize anything I stated cleanly, slicing through his pathetic defense. You cannot legally authorize a transaction on a credit account that does not belong to you. That is called credit card fraud. But that is not even the most severe crime you committed yesterday. The venue required a digital signature to process the final $67,000 payment. They sent an electronic document that required the signer to verify their identity. Someone checked that box and typed my name. We were under extreme duress. William stammered, his confident facade beginning to fracture. The venue coordinator was threatening to cancel the entire reception while the guests were arriving. We had to push the paperwork through to buy us a few days until Andre's offshore wire cleared. It was a victimless administrative shortcut. There is no such thing as a victimless administrative shortcut in the banking sector, I replied. Every digital action leaves a permanent forensic footprint when you sign an electronic document. The software logs the exact internet protocol address of the device used to execute the signature. It stamps the geographic location, the device type, and the exact network coordinates into the metadata of the contract. Did you really think my bank would just reverse a massive charge without investigating the origin of the fraud? William went completely silent. I could hear his rapid, shallow breathing through the speakerphone. I pulled the raw data logs from the merchant processor. I continued, refusing to give him a second to recover. I tracked the internet protocol address attached to the forged signature. It did not originate from your mobile phone, William. It did not originate from Catherine's device. The network coordinates tracked perfectly to a luxury loft apartment in downtown Boston. It came directly from Andre's personal laptop. Your brilliant billionaire son-in-law sat in his apartment, opened the venue invoice, typed my name, and committed federal wire fraud to pay for his own wedding. That is impossible. William gasped, his voice dropping to a terrified whisper. Andre was helping us with the logistics. He was managing the vendor contracts. He would not intentionally commit fraud. He just handled the paperwork for us because we were overwhelmed. He committed a federal felony. I corrected him harshly. Under the law, transmitting fraudulent authorizations across state lines or international borders using a telecommunications network constitutes wire fraud. Each instance carries a maximum penalty of 20 years in a federal penitentiary. Andre forged my identity to steal $67,000. And because you and Catherine willfully provided him with my credit card details, you are legally classified as co-conspirators. You facilitated the crime. We did not know. William pleaded completely, abandoning his authoritative tone. We did not know he was going to forge your signature. We just gave him the billing details to hold the reservation. You have to believe us, Claire. You cannot let them arrest us for a mistake. Ignorance is not a valid legal defense. I replied coldly. But your intent does not even matter at this point. The mechanism is already in motion. You demanded to know what I meant when I said I handed the authorities a map. Let me be perfectly clear. I did not just call American Express and ask for a refund. I compiled the internet protocol logs, the transaction data, the forged signature metadata, and the geographic tracking information into a comprehensive digital dossier. What did you do? William asked, his voice cracking with absolute terror. I submitted that entire dossier directly to the Financial Crimes Division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I stated delivering the ultimate fatal blow. I also filed a concurrent report with the Securities and Exchange Commission. You wanted to play high society games with a man who wears expensive suits and talks about venture capital. You wanted to impress your country club friends so badly that you aided and abetted a financial predator. Now you get to explain your bridge loan to federal agents. Claire, please withdraw the report, William begged, sobbing heavily. You cannot send us to federal prison. We will lose the house. We will be ruined. You ruined yourselves, I said calmly. I immediately disconnected the call. I stared at the blinking light on my desk console. Less than 10 seconds passed before the digital display lit up again. This time it was Catherine calling from her personal cell phone. I let it ring twice before picking up the receiver. I did not say a word. I just listened to the chaotic sobbing on the other end. Claire, please, Catherine gasped, her voice devoid of its usual arrogance. William is hyperventilating. You cannot leave us like this. You cannot just drop a bomb about federal investigators and hang up the phone. We are your parents. You have to help us fix this. We will pay you whatever you want. We will give you anything. You have nothing left to give. Catherine, I replied, my voice unyielding. You cannot pay me back because your bank accounts are empty. You are negotiating with funds that do not exist. That is not true, she cried out. Andre is going to transfer the venture capital funds on Monday. We just need to hold off the venue owner until the wire clears. He showed William the portfolios himself. He built a massive software company. I let out a sharp, cold laugh. He did not build a software company. Catherine, he built a mirage. I spent the last 3 days conducting a forensic deep dive into his corporate structure. Your brilliant son-in-law does not have venture capital backing. His company has 0 actual revenue. His board of directors consists of fake profiles. His chief financial officer is a convicted felon who served time in Florida for running the exact same type of scam. Andre is a professional con artist operating a textbook Ponzi scheme. The line went dead silent. I could hear Catherine breathing in rapid, shallow bursts in the background. I heard William stammering incoherent words of denial. He targets wealthy suburbanites who desperately want to feel like elite investors. I continued methodically. He uses complex technological jargon to confuse you into handing over your savings. He then uses your fresh capital to pay off older investors, creating the illusion of a profitable business. But the vast bulk of the cash goes directly into his personal offshore accounts to fund his luxury lifestyle. He is not a tech mogul. He is a parasite. No, Catherine whispered. That is impossible. We saw the prospectus. We met his business partners. He bought Madison a $50,000 engagement ring. He drives a custom Porsche. He drives a custom Porsche because you bought it for him, I stated cleanly, delivering the final devastating blow. What are you talking about? William suddenly yelled, grabbing the phone back. We never bought him a car. We invested in his initial public offering. You invested in a phantom asset, William first replied. 8 months ago. You walked into the office of a predatory hard money lender in a New Jersey strip mall. You signed a deed of trust securing a home equity line of credit against your fully paid-off retirement property. You pulled out exactly $300,000 at a staggering 15% interest rate. You handed that massive sum of cash directly to Andre under the delusion that you were securing founders' shares. We were securing our financial legacy, William argued defensively, though his voice was shaking violently. He guaranteed us a 300% return. We were going to buy the summer house in the Hamptons. You are never going to the Hamptons again. William, I said ruthlessly. I tracked the routing numbers attached to your specific capital injection. The moment your $300,000 hit Andre's domestic account, he immediately transferred it to an offshore bank in Cyprus. He did not invest a single penny into software development. He used your retirement equity to pay off his mounting casino debts. He used it to purchase that custom Porsche he loves to park in your driveway. He used it to charter the private seaplane Madison is currently flying on in Bora Bora. You did not buy into a tech company. You bought your own daughter's fake influencer lifestyle. The sound that came through the receiver was unlike anything I had ever heard. It was a guttural, visceral wail of absolute despair. Catherine had collapsed. I could hear the physical thud as her knees hit the hardwood floor of their Connecticut home. She was sobbing uncontrollably, gasping for air as the sheer magnitude of their ruin finally penetrated her thick, stubborn skull. All the money is gone. I continued. Andre exhausted your $300,000 weeks ago. That is exactly why he could not cover the final invoice for the wedding venue. His Ponzi scheme was running out of fresh victims, and he had zero liquidity left. You were completely tapped out. You had no cash reserves left to pay the caterers. Your backs were against a wall. And instead of admitting you were broke, you decided to commit wire fraud using my credit card. William was crying now. The proud, arrogant man who had spent my entire life telling me I was a disappointment was openly weeping into the telephone. We lost the house. He sobbed, his voice completely broken. We lost the house. Claire, we have a balloon payment coming due, and we have no money. They are going to take the house. Yes, they are. I confirmed clinically. The hard money lender will foreclose on the property. Mr. Harrison will win his civil lawsuit and place a lien on whatever assets remain. The federal authorities will freeze your remaining accounts while they investigate your role in Andre's fraud network. Your country club friends will read about your bankruptcy in the public notices. You sacrificed your own daughter to protect an illusion, and now you get to live in the wreckage. Claire, please. Catherine wailed from the floor, her voice echoing distantly through the speaker. You have to help us. We have nowhere to go. We have nothing left. You made your choices, I said, my voice dropping to a final chilling register. You chose the aesthetic. You chose the status. You chose the fake billionaire over your own flesh. Now you get to face the consequences. Do not ever call this number again. I reached out and pressed the disconnect button. The line went dead. I immediately blocked their numbers on our corporate telecom system, ensuring they could never bypass my personal filters again. I sat back in my chair and looked out the window. The London sky was perfectly bright and clear. The storm had finally broken apart. While I sat in the quiet comfort of my London office, the federal machinery I had set in motion was executing its final devastating sequence across the globe. Madison and Andre did not get to enjoy the remainder of their tropical honeymoon. After the resort management in Bora Bora locked them out of their overwater bungalow due to their frozen bank accounts, the local authorities intervened, without any access to cash or credit to pay their exorbitant balance. They were detained and subsequently deported. They were escorted to the local airport and placed on a commercial economy flight back to the United States. It was a humiliating downgrade for a couple who had arrived on a chartered seaplane. They landed at Boston Logan International Airport, exhausted, furious, and completely unaware of the welcoming committee waiting for them. They took a cheap taxi back to their expensive downtown Boston loft, expecting to regroup and call their lawyers. They assumed this was a temporary bank error that could be resolved with a few angry phone calls. They had no idea that federal agents had already secured a no-knock warrant based entirely on the forensic dossier I had provided. The moment Andre placed his key into the door of their luxury penthouse, the hallway erupted in a flurry of tactical gear and federal windbreakers. The Federal Bureau of Investigation does not execute financial warrants quietly. Armed agents swarmed the apartment, ordering both of them to the ground. The pristine aesthetic of Madison's perfectly curated life was instantly shattered by the chaotic reality of a federal raid. Agents methodically dismantled the apartment. They seized Andre's laptop, the very machine he had used to forge my digital signature. They confiscated encrypted hard drives, hardware wallets, and file cabinets filled with fraudulent investor contracts. But the Asset Forfeit Division did not stop at corporate electronics, because the entire loft and its contents were funded by a criminal enterprise. Every luxury item Madison had ever flaunted on the internet was legally subject to seizure. Agents stripped the designer clothing from her massive walk-in closet. They confiscated the expensive watches and the diamond engagement ring that had been purchased with my parents' home equity loan, down in the private parking garage. Federal authorities towed the custom Porsche. Madison was forced to sit handcuffed on her expensive Italian leather sofa, watching agents physically box up her entire identity. She screamed and cried, demanding to speak to a manager threatening to ruin their careers using her social media platform. The agents simply ignored her, reading Andre his Miranda rights before leading him out of the building in federal restraints. The arrest was a spectacular public event. Local news crews, having caught wind of a massive Ponzi scheme collapsing in the financial district, had already gathered on the sidewalk outside the loft building. As agents escorted Andre through the lobby, camera flashes illuminated his terrified face. He was no longer the confident, charismatic tech mogul. He was a humiliated, exposed criminal being shoved into the back of a federal transport vehicle. He was formally charged with 20 counts of wire fraud, money laundering, and operating an unregistered security scheme. Madison was left standing on the sidewalk, clutching a small plastic bag of her remaining unseized personal items. The media immediately turned their lenses on her. Her flawless influencer facade evaporated in real time, within hours. The news of the raid dominated every major media outlet and digital platform. The internet is a ruthless arena when an influencer falls from grace, and Madison experienced the absolute maximum velocity of cancel culture. True crime content creators and financial commentators dissected her online presence. They pulled up her old videos where she bragged about her wealthy husband and mercilessly mocked her. They matched her luxury purchases with the dates Andre defrayed retired school teachers and suburban couples. She was publicly branded as a complicit accessory to a devastating financial crime. Her follower count plummeted. Every single brand sponsor she had ever worked with dropped her instantly, releasing public statements condemning her involvement in the fraud. The comment sections on her remaining social media posts turned into a vicious digital firing squad. Victims of Andre's scheme flooded her pages demanding their life savings back. They cursed her for sipping expensive champagne while they faced bankruptcy. Madison attempted to post a frantic, tearful apology video, claiming she had no idea about the source of the money. She turned on the camera without makeup, trying to garner sympathy by portraying herself as a naive victim of a manipulative man. The internet rejected her performance instantly. Digital sleuths pointed out that she had actively mocked her own sister just days prior, defending Andre and bragging about their elite status. They highlighted the sheer impossibility of her ignorance given the staggering velocity of their spending. She was forced to delete all her accounts, completely erasing her digital existence to escape the relentless barrage of public hatred. She had built her entire self-worth on the validation of strangers, and those same strangers had just enthusiastically destroyed her. I monitored the spectacular fallout from my laptop thousands of miles away. I read the indictment documents released by the federal prosecutor. The federal charges were ironclad. Andre would not be seeing the outside of a prison cell for a very long time. Madison was financially and socially annihilated, left with a destroyed reputation and zero marketable skills to rebuild her life. I felt absolutely no pity for them. They had arrogantly danced on the edge of a cliff, assuming they were invincible. I merely provided the gentle push that gravity required. The first phase of karmic justice had been flawlessly executed. The fraudulent tech billionaire was locked in a federal holding cell, and the cruel influencer was reduced to a digital pariah. Now, the consequences would inevitably ripple outward to the enablers who had financed the entire disaster, guaranteeing their absolute destruction forever. Now the consequences would inevitably ripple outward to the enablers who had financed the entire disaster, guaranteeing their absolute destruction forever. Mr. Harrison, the owner of the Newport Coastal Castle, was not a man who accepted financial defeat. The morning after the federal raid in Boston, his legal team filed a devastating civil lawsuit against Catherine and William in the state of Rhode Island, because my parents had proudly signed the primary vendor contracts as the official hosts of the extravagant wedding. They were held entirely liable for the financial damages. Mr. Harrison did not merely sue them for the bounced $67,000. He aggressively pursued compensation for breach of contract, extensive legal fees, and severe punitive damages. When the court summons arrived at my parents' Connecticut estate, they were completely paralyzed. They had absolutely no liquid capital left to retain a competent defense attorney. Without legal representation, they failed to respond to the summons within the required window. The judge swiftly issued a default judgment in favor of the venue owner, granting him the immediate right to place a massive financial lien against their property. The legal lien was the fatal blow that triggered a catastrophic chain reaction. The predatory hard money lending firm in New Jersey actively monitored the public records of the properties they held as collateral. The moment the Rhode Island court placed a lien on my parents' house, the lender's automatic risk management software flagged their account. According to the strict covenants embedded in their high-interest home equity line of credit, any secondary legal claim placed on the property constituted an immediate breach of contract. The lender invoked the acceleration clause, instantly calling in the entire $300,000 principal. They demanded full repayment within 10 business days. Catherine and William possessed exactly zero. They could not secure a secondary loan because their credit scores had been decimated by the outstanding venue debt and their association with a federally indicted criminal. When the 10-day grace period expired, the lending firm acted with ruthless corporate efficiency. They officially initiated the foreclosure process. Within weeks, a vibrant yellow bank auction notice was hammered into the pristine, manicured grass of my parents' front lawn. It was a neon beacon of failure, broadcasting their absolute financial ruin to the entire wealthy neighborhood. The psychological impact of that sign was more devastating to Catherine and William than the actual loss of money. They had spent decades building a carefully curated aesthetic of generational wealth, looking down their noses at anyone who drove a standard vehicle or shopped at discount stores. Now they were the undeniable spectacle of the suburb. The social execution was immediate and merciless. High society operates on a strict code of self-preservation, and my parents were suddenly highly radioactive. The exclusive country club, where they had spent years networking and gossiping, revoked their membership privileges overnight, citing unpaid monthly dues and a violation of the Community Morality Clause due to the federal fraud investigation. When Catherine attempted to attend her weekly charity luncheon, the host physically turned her away at the door politely, but firmly stating that her presence was no longer appropriate. Their neighbors crossed the street to avoid making eye contact. The people who had gladly drank their imported wine at engagement parties now whispered viciously about them in the aisles of the local organic grocery store. They were completely socially exiled, stripped of every vanity metric they used to define their self-worth. To satisfy the mounting legal judgments, they were forced to liquidate everything of value. The luxury sedans they loved to parade around town were repossessed by the dealership. Catherine had to sell her designer jewelry collections and vintage handbags to pawn shops for absolute pennies on the dollar just to afford basic groceries. The bank formally seized the house, executing the eviction order with stunning speed. My parents were given exactly 72 hours to vacate the premises they had called home for 30 years. With no money and a shattered credit history, they could not secure a lease in any respectable neighborhood. They were forced to rent a cramped, run-down two-bedroom apartment in a heavily industrialized zip code on the outer edge of the city. The contrast between their sprawling estate and this depressing concrete box was staggering. The apartment had thin walls, peeling linoleum floors, and a persistent smell of damp drywall. Their misery was compounded when Madison, having filed for total bankruptcy and lost her influencer loft, had no choice but to move in with them. 3 deeply narcissistic people, entirely stripped of their wealth and social standing, were now permanently trapped together in a tiny, miserable space. They spent their days trapped in an endless cycle of toxic blame, screaming at each other over unpaid electric bills and cheap microwave dinners. It was from this dark pit of despair that they made one final pathetic attempt to reach me. They purchased a cheap prepaid cellular phone from a local convenience store to bypass the strict communication blocks I had established on my personal and corporate networks. I was sitting at my desk in London reviewing a routine compliance report when an unknown international number flashed across my screen. I answered it cautiously, expecting a business client. "Claire, please." A voice wept through the receiver. It was Catherine, her tone entirely devoid of pride, sounding aged and thoroughly broken. "Please do not hang up. We are begging you. We lost the house. We lost everything. We are living in a horrible place and we cannot afford the heating bill. Madison cries all day. Your father looks sick. We made a terrible mistake trusting Andre. We were blind. But we are still your family. You have a massive corporate salary. You have the trust fund money. You can save us. Please just send us enough to get a decent place. We will do whatever you want. We will apologize publicly. Please just save us." I sat in the quiet comfort of my high-rise office, looking out at the beautiful historic architecture of the city. I felt absolutely nothing for the weeping woman on the other end of the line. There was no anger left. There was no sadness. There was only a profound, clinical emptiness. They had traded my dignity to protect a scammer, and now they were begging the daughter they had discarded to rescue them from the very fire they had ignited. I did not offer a response. I did not utter a single word of justification or closure. I simply pulled the phone away from my ear, pressed the red disconnect button, and permanently blocked the prepaid number. I set the device back on my desk, picked up my pen, and returned to my audit. The ledger was officially balanced. The accounts were permanently settled. I would never speak to them again. I would never speak to them again. I stood up from my desk and walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows of my London flat. The city was alive beneath me, a sprawling network of light and movement cutting through the evening fog, for the first time in 33 years. My mind was entirely quiet. The constant background noise of my childhood, the relentless criticism, the endless comparisons, the suffocating pressure to conform to a superficial aesthetic was permanently gone. I had surgically removed the infection from my life. Looking down at the rivers, I felt a profound sense of rebirth. Society conditions us to believe that cutting ties with your parents is a tragedy. We are taught to endure emotional abuse simply because the perpetrators share our genetic code. We are conditioned to forgive the unforgivable under the guise of family loyalty. But as I stood there surrounded by the peace and security I had built entirely on my own, I realized that walking away was not a tragedy at all. It was the ultimate act of self-preservation. Financial independence is not just about having the ability to buy expensive things. It is about building an impenetrable fortress around your peace of mind. Catherine and William treated wealth as a costume. They used credit cards and home equity loans to buy props for a play they were putting on for their neighbors. They wanted the appearance of success without the discipline required to actually achieve it. That desperate need for external validation made them the perfect targets for a predator like Andre. They were willing to mortgage their entire future just to secure a fleeting moment of social supremacy. I chose a completely different path. I chose the unglamorous, grueling reality of hard work. I studied datasets while my sister practiced camera angles. I built a career rooted in empirical truth and accountability. My financial security is not a mirage constructed on borrowed capital and fraudulent promises. It is a solid concrete foundation forged through years of relentless dedication. Because I earned every single penny in my bank account. I possessed the ultimate power. The power to say no. The power to walk away. The power to look at toxic people who demand my resources and completely shut the door in their faces. Money gave me the leverage to enforce my boundaries with absolute authority. There is a dangerous myth that family is an unbreakable bond that must be preserved at all costs. This narrative keeps millions of people trapped in cycles of manipulation and abuse. We are told that we must set aside our own well-being to accommodate the toxic behavior of our relatives. But blood does not give anyone a free pass to exploit you. Shared DNA is merely a biological coincidence. It is not a contract for lifelong servitude. My parents demonstrated their true priorities when they physically barred me from a wedding venue I helped pay for. They showed me exactly who they were when they resorted to identity theft to cover up their own financial recklessness. When people show you that they value a fake socialite aesthetic over your fundamental human dignity, you must believe them. You cannot love a narcissist into respecting you. You cannot reason with people who are committed to their own delusions. The only winning strategy is total amputation by legally and emotionally detaching myself from their collapsing universe. I saved my own life. I refused to let their sinking ship drag me into the abyss. I became an orphan by choice. And in doing so, I finally became free. The concept of family is entirely malleable. Over the past several months, I have cultivated a circle of people who actually understand the definition of loyalty. I have colleagues who respect my intellect and value my contributions. I have friends across Europe who celebrate my successes without a shred of jealousy or ulterior motive. We support each other through genuine hardships, and we celebrate our victories without needing to broadcast them to an audience of strangers. We do not demand financial bailouts or forge digital signatures to maintain an illusion. This is what true family looks like. It is a mutually beneficial ecosystem built on honesty, accountability, and unconditional respect. I did not lose a family when I got into that rideshare vehicle outside the Newport Coastal Castle. I shed a parasite. I left behind a hollow shell of a family and stepped into a world of my own making. Every action has a consequence, and the universe has a highly efficient accounting system. Catherine, William, Madison, and Andre tried to manipulate the ledger. They tried to steal, cheat, and gaslight their way into a life they did not earn. Now they are paying the ultimate deficit. They are bankrupt, disgraced, and facing the devastating reality of their own reflection in a cramped industrial apartment. Meanwhile, my accounts are perfectly balanced. My future is secure, and my peace is absolute. If you are listening to this and you are currently trapped in a toxic family dynamic, I want you to pay close attention. You do not have to stay. You do not owe your sanity to people who treat you like a disposable resource. You are allowed to pack your bags, order the car, and drive away from the burning building. Protect your assets, protect your mental health, and never apologize for prioritizing your own survival. Start building your own fortress today. Audit your life. Identify the liabilities and cut them loose without hesitation. Have you ever had to draw a hard line and permanently cut off toxic family members to protect your financial and emotional well-being? How did you break free from the guilt trips and the manipulation? I want to read your stories in the comments below. Take a moment to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you believe in the absolute power of karmic justice and financial independence. Share this video with anyone who needs the courage to walk away from toxic relatives. Thank you for listening to my story. Remember that your peace is your most valuable asset, and you must protect it at all costs. The story of Claire's execution of karmic justice offers a profound reflection on the complex intersection of familial duty, emotional manipulation, and self-preservation. The most striking lesson we can extract from her narrative is that financial and emotional independence is not merely a mechanism for acquiring material luxury. Rather, it serves as the absolute ultimate armor against manipulation and abuse. Throughout the story, Claire's parents and sister operate under the deeply toxic assumption that shared DNA provides a blank check for exploitation. They weaponize their perceived social status, constantly gaslight her authentic achievements, and ultimately commit felony wire fraud to fund a deceptive lifestyle. They do this while fully expecting that traditional familial loyalty will shield them from any real-world consequences. However, Claire's meticulously calculated response shatters the ingrained societal myth that you must endlessly forgive toxic relatives simply because they are blood. By removing reactive emotion from the equation and relying entirely on undeniable logic, empirical data, and strict legal boundaries,